Do you agree with the saying that what God cannot do does not exist? This is the story of Joe. Joe lay in his bed, his body frail and motionless, the life he once knew slipping further from his grasp each day. His once vibrant eyes now stared blankly at the ceiling, a prison of flesh and bone that trapped his mind within. Diagnosed with non-verbal autism from birth, Joe had always lived in a world of silence. But now, his condition had worsened. Stroke, diabetes, and prostate cancer had taken their toll, leaving him bedridden and in palliative care. The doctors had done all they could, and now his caretakers could only offer him comfort as he awaited the inevitable. The room was always dim, as if the very walls absorbed the gloom that hovered over Joe. The air was thick with despair, the kind that clings to a person, pulling them into the depths of hopelessness. Joe could not speak, but he could think, and his thoughts were his only company in those lonely hours. His mind raced with questions. Why had life been so cruel? What was the point of all his wealth if it could not buy him the health he so desperately needed? Mark and Jody, Joe's step-siblings, were indifferent at best. They had taken control of his fortune after their parents' deaths, and they now waited for Joe's passing as if it were a formality. Not very long now, Jody had whispered to Mark one evening as they stood by Joe's bedside. Not very long, and we won't have to hide to spend the cash. Joe screamed silently, "No, I'm not done. I want to live." But no one could hear him. Amidst the coldness of his step-siblings, there was one light in Joe's life, Sarah, his night caregiver. Sarah was a kind, middle-aged woman who had seen her share of pain. She had lost her husband and children in a tragic car accident years ago, yet her faith had never wavered. She was gentle, always taking care to speak softly to Joe, even though he could not respond. She bathed him, fed him, and prayed over him each night, asking God to bring peace to his troubled soul. One night, as Sarah sat by Joe's bed, she felt a strong urge to pray for his healing. It wasn't just the routine prayer she always said. This was different. It was as if God himself was urging her to intercede on Joe's behalf. She laid her hand on Joe's chest and began to pray fervently, asking Jesus to heal him completely, to restore what had been lost, and to breathe new life into his broken body. In his mind, Joe felt something shift. It was as if a door had been opened, and light was flooding into the darkness that had enveloped him for so long. He saw his parents, standing in a place that was neither here nor there, but filled with peace and warmth, and then he saw him, Jesus. Jesus extended his hand to Joe and said, "You will be a witness, Joe. Come, let's go." Suddenly, Joe felt himself being pulled back into his body, back into his room. Jesus was there, standing by his bedside, holding his hand. He leaned in close and whispered, "Rise, Joe." And just like that, Joe opened his eyes, not just to see, but to truly live. The next morning, Jody walked into Joe's room, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of how soon they could access his inheritance. But when she saw Joe sitting up in bed, a weak but clear hello escaping his lips, her face turned white as paper. She stumbled out of the room, calling for Mark, disbelief and fear lacing her voice. Mark rushed in, and they both stared at Joe as if he were a ghost. They called the doctors immediately, and a flurry of tests was ordered. Over the next few days, Joe regained the use of his weak left side. He could eat and drink on his own, and his energy slowly returned. The doctors were baffled. They had no medical explanation for his sudden recovery. Joe told them about the out-of-body experience, how he had been with his parents and Jesus, and how he had heard Sarah's voice praying for him. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was Jesus who had healed him, but the miracle was not well received by all. Mark and Jody, seeing their hopes of inheriting Joe's fortune slipping away, were filled with a mixture of fear and anger. They were the ones who had made a complaint to the care agency, accusing Sarah of overstepping her bounds as a caregiver by praying for Joe. As a result, Sarah was fired from her job. However, the miracle had already taken place. Joe was completely healed. When he went to the hospital to confirm, the test showed no trace of cancer, stroke, diabetes, or high blood pressure. The doctors called it remission, but Joe knew better. Jesus healed me, he told them. I know what I experienced. Though overjoyed by his miraculous recovery, Joe felt a deep void. Sarah was no longer in his life, and he had no way of finding her. He was determined to reconnect with her, to thank her for the prayers that had saved his life. But where could he start? As Joe began his search for Sarah, little did he know the incredible story that lay behind this humble woman, a story filled with loss, grief, and unwavering faith. The bond between them, born out of prayer and miraculous healing, would grow into something neither of them expected. But for now, Joe had to find her, to tell her what Jesus had done. And so Joe, a man in his 50s who had never spoken a word in his life due to autism, got healed. Autism was reversed, stroke reversed, diabetes, high blood pressure and cancer also reversed, all without a trace. Stay tuned for part 2 of this incredible story.